Now that we've completed photosynthesis, we're going to move into the second biochemical reaction that is important for almost every organism on Earth, and that is cellular respiration. In order to understand cellular respiration, and even photosynthesis for a small point, you need to look at the molecule adenosine triphosphate. This is the same molecule that I've been calling ATP all year. And if you use the terminology ATP instead of adenosine triphosphate, that's fine. However, just like most molecules in biology, adenosine triphosphate usually, or its name is specific to either its structure or its function. And in this case, it's to its structure. So if you look, we're going to talk about the differences between adenosine diphosphate and adenosine triphosphate, so ADP and ATP. So if you look at ADP and ATP, there is very little difference between their structure. You have your nitrogen base here, and it's the exact same nitrogen base on both molecules. You have your ribose sugar. Okay, so you've got one component, nitrogen base. You've got the second component, which is your ribose sugar. And then over here, you've got your third component, which are your phosphate groups. And that is where the difference lies in adenosine diphosphate versus adenosine triphosphate. Adenosine diphosphate has 2 phosphate groups on it, 1, 2, and adenosine triphosphate has 3. So the only difference between these two is that adenosine diphosphate has this third one added on in order to create adenosine triphosphate. And the way your book explained this is like a charged battery. So this is a fully charged battery. Because it gives you the most energy. Whereas this is like a partially charged battery. Because it does not give you the amount of energy that ATP does. So this is the really, really crucial molecule for our bodies because it gives us a ton of energy. And the precursor to it is ADP. So in a lot of the reactions that you're going to see in this lecture, or in this series of lectures for cellular respiration, you're going to see ATP being converted, or sorry, ADP being converted into ATP to store energy. Whereas you might also see ATP being converted into ADP to release energy. Okay, so that's what you're going to be talking about with these. So make sure you're just familiar with the difference between ADP and ATP. You don't need to know the structures. You don't need to know exactly the nitrogen-based structure, the ribose structure. Simply all you need to know is that you're adding a phosphate in order to provide more energy storage in your ATP. Now, for some reason, I cannot. So when we talk about cellular respiration, if you look at your formula, you have C6H12O6 plus oxygen. So you've got your glucose plus your oxygen through a series of enzyme reactions. You produce water, carbon dioxide, and your ATP, which is your energy source. Okay, it's a molecule, but it also is the molecule that provides our body with energy. Now, if you notice something, this formula is the exact opposite as photosynthesis. So if you go back to your photosynthesis notes, you will notice that Water, carbon dioxide, and solar energy are going to give you glucose and oxygen. Whereas in cellular respiration, it's the exact opposite, whereas your reactants are now glucose and oxygen, and they react to give you your water, your carbon dioxide, in order to create your ATP. So cellular respiration takes glucose from food that we eat, all right, so it breaks down and digests the food that we eat into glucose, and the oxygen from the air that we breathe in order to produce ATP, which is our energy source. So that's what you see in this diagram here. You got you got your glucose entering this structure called the mitochondria, which is an organelle. Yeah, the oxygen enters the mitochondria as well, and then you have water, carbon dioxide, and ATP leave the mitochondria. Now, water and carbon dioxide are not really that important because they are simply byproducts of the process. So that's why our bodies produce a lot of water, is because we are constantly, each one of our cells on a daily basis, consistently or like every second undergoing this process in order to create energy. So this is something that's continually happening in our bodies. And all ATP the body uses comes directly from the mitochondria. So it's important to know that cellular respiration happens in the mitochondria. So because of that, we're going to talk about some of the anatomy of the mitochondria. Okay, so eukaryotes. So in eukaryotes, which are our cells, okay, eukaryotic organisms. We'll talk about that in a few weeks. Cellular respiration occurs in the mitochondria. So if you look at the mitochondria, it is different from the chloroplast, because chloroplasts have 3 membranes, as we talked about earlier this week, and mitochondria have 2. So if you look, here's your outer membrane of your mitochondria, is this outer portion of the organelle. And just inside, where you see all this folding going on, these folded little channels and stuff, that is your inner membrane. Okay, so there's an outer membrane and inner membrane. Those are your 2 membranes. The folds, or these folds in the mitochondria, those are called your cristae. All right, you don't really need to know that too well. Just notice that that's what they're called. And but one of the important things you need to know is that the matrix of the mitochondria is this fluid-like cytoplasm stuff inside the cell. This is the equivalent of the stroma in your chloroplast. So if we look, cellular respiration is actually very much like having a campfire, if you think about it, because we use food for fuel, and cellular respiration uses fuel, and we both use oxygen to convert that fuel into carbon dioxide, water, and heat, or a type of energy. So it's like thermal energy. Whereas in our bodies, we do the same thing. We take a fuel with oxygen and convert it into carbon dioxide, water, and ATP, as well as a little bit of heat. So this is our energy here. Very similar processes. And if you look, the process is actually even more similar when you look at what wood and our food is usually made up of. So glucose is a carbohydrate, remember the OSE, and they're in your wood. Okay, you've got a lot of carbohydrates, specifically cellulose. So again, you've got the OSE. You've got glucose being broken down in cellular respiration to make this, And in a campfire, you've got cellulose being broken down into these materials. So essentially, the only difference between these two is that you have glucose in one and cellulose in the other. But what's the difference? How come our cells are not on fire? That's the question. Okay? If cells released all the energy from stored glucose at one time, your cells would blow up. That's because there's just too much energy. All right? I like to think of it like starting a fire in your cells. All right? And that's not a good thing. Because of this, organisms have evolved a method of releasing energy in a slow manner, okay, so slowly over 3 different stages, all right? And so instead of just letting it all on fire at once, what you're going to do is your cells are going to break it down slowly. And that slow breakdown is going to allow you to use the energy more efficiently and to not use it and waste it like you would if you burned it all at once. So the first stage is called glycolysis. The second stage is called the Krebs cycle. And the third stage is called the electron transport chain. Electron transport chain is very similar to one in photosynthesis. It is slightly different. The Krebs cycle is very much like your Kelvin cycle in photosynthesis. So those should be familiar to you guys. Now, how we're going to finish up today is a brief discussion on glycolysis. All right, and this is going to be glycolysis that happens with the presence. So this is with oxygen gas present. So this is the normal type of glycolysis that happens. Okay, so this is normally what happens in your body. And essentially what glycolysis is responsible for is the initial breakdown of glucose. Okay, so you've got a 6-carbon molecule of glucose into pyruvic acid, which is a 3-carbon molecule. So here you've got your glucose, all right, in the beginning of the reaction, and after a series of enzyme catalyzed reactions, you're going to have pyruvic acid. Okay, so that's what's used, glucose, and produced pyruvic acid. And the function, pyruvic acid gets sent to the Krebs cycle. Now, basically what happens in order to do this is you take ATP, you take 2 of the ATP molecules, and you take the energy from those ATP molecules and you convert glucose into this 3-carbon precursor, or like molecule before pyruvic acid. When that happens, you then are allowed to make a little bit of energy by taking 4 ADP, converting them into 4 ATP, and 4 of these molecules called NAD+, which are similar to NADPH. They're electron transporters. But what you end up doing is you take and you create these in order to make pyruvic acid. So you're taking ATP and you're creating ADP, which provides energy to split glucose. So the G stands for glucose. And you also have ADP in the same reaction going to ATP. And what that does is it converts or helps convert pyruvic acid, or your precursor, into pyruvic acid, and also gets sent to the electron transport chain. Electron transport chain. So that's what the ETC stands for, electron transport chain. And then lastly, you have NAD+, and goes to NADH. And that is sent to the electron transport chain too. So what is the net production of ATP during glucose? Well, you used 2, so -2, and you created 4. So the net production is 2. Okay? So that is our lecture. I will see you in class.